Today we're actually joined by Jared Edwards from Luxul. Jared, are you there?
I am indeed.
Great. Well, I'll let you start rock and rolling and telling us about some of the new stuff from Luxul.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it. And thank all of you for joining us today. I know everyone's busy and taking time out in the morning sometimes for a little webinar is maybe not exactly what you had planned, but we sure appreciate your time and the ability to talk with you for a couple of minutes here. My goal today is trying to give you an update on a few things that we've got either recently released or that are very close to coming up to being in release, and just kind of give you an update as to where we're at and then some of the things that we're working on and some of the ways that we try to make it so that we can help you be more effective in your role as an integrator. So the first thing I wanted to talk about real quickly here is our new Easy Setup app. Some of you may have seen this, some of you may have not. It is currently available on both iOS and Android and is currently, of course, available in both the App Store and the Play Store. So it is available for you to download currently if you haven't yet. And the idea behind this is for you to be able to have, let's say, for lack of a better term, one of your entry level or junior level installers go out to a job and set up a wireless router or more of a medium to basic network and be able to do it very, very quickly. Now, of course, it's not just confined to junior level guys. Anyone can use this, of course. We've had the owners of companies and the guys that have been doing this for 20 years that have found this app to be very useful because it does make things very, very quick. So what this is it is a setup app meant for our 1200 and 3150 wireless routers. And there's a couple things that you do want to be aware of when you're going to use this app. First of all, again, because it's easy setup, this is intended to be used when you're setting up a router for the first time. So because of that, the router does need to be in a factory defaulted state, which of course it's going to be if you're just pulling it out of the box to install it into this home or this business. And what we mean by factory default state is the SSIDs being broadcast have to be the default, Luxul 3150 or Luxul 3155G, for example, with no password on them because that is what the app looks for. And then the firmware has to be 631 or higher, which is going to be fairly easy because that is what the routers are shipping with coming out of the warehouse currently. Now, there is a newer update, which a lot of the newer wireless routers are going to have by default on them, which is 642. And we'll talk about how you can get to that here in just a moment. But if your router isn't in a factory default state, I bring this up because the app will not be able to find the router and set it up properly, and you'll be back to the standard method of going into the web user interface, which of course you still can do at any time. So let me go through this app real quick and show you how easy it is. Now, the caveat to this is that this app, I know it won't seem like it as we go through it, but when you go through the process, it literally is a 2-minute process. And again, the whole idea with this was to be able to enable you to be able to take a router out of the box and 2 to 2.5 minutes later have a network up and running. And that's exactly what we've been able to accomplish. So we're really excited about this. So the first screen that's going to come up is it's going to be 3 instructions that say, please do this before you go any further. And of course, it is connect the network cable from your modem to the internet port on the router, make sure the modem is powered on and working, and then turn the power on of your Luxul router and wait for it to boot up. Once those things are done, you hit next, and the app will now try to connect to the router automatically. Now, the neat thing about this is it doesn't matter whether your phone or tablet has Wi-Fi turned on or not. If your phone does not have Wi-Fi turned on, it will automatically turn it on for you, find the router, and connect to it. So it literally is a seamless process from start to finish. Of course, when it finds the router, it will ask you, do you see the 2.4 and 5 gig lights flashing rapidly on the front of the unit? And this is a very obvious flash. I mean, they are in unison, they are very quick. It is obvious that they are flashing together. And the reason that we did this is because we do have a number of dealers, of course, that will have several routers out for several jobs, and they will be configuring them at their office. And you obviously want to know that you're connected to the proper one so that you're not configuring one in a way that is going to be taken to the wrong job site. Now, most of the time that's not a big deal, but it's just an indication that yes, you are connected to the router and everything's good. And like I said, it is a very obvious flash that this is what's going on. So you hit yes, and it will then ask you to set your administrator password. Now, this is the regular password that you're used to when you bring up a web interface, and you have to type in admin and admin to get in as default. This changes that admin password if you want to. Of course, you can just type in admin and continue on, or you can change it to whatever it is you would like to do right there. And as soon as you do, the next will go from gray to green, and you'll be able to continue on with that. The next screen you'll see is it'll say you're connected. Let's make sure the router has the latest firmware. Now, one thing to note here is it will go out and find the router or find the firmware in the cloud if there is one to be updated, and it will do all of this automatically, just like if you click the update firmware button inside the user interface. What this tries to do is make sure that you're on the latest firmware all the time. So two things here. Number one, if you click next, or when you click next, I should say, it will tell you either an update is found and wait a few minutes while the update is applied. So it will now go to the cloud, pull the update down, install the firmware on the router, and reboot the router. That does change the process from about a 2-minute process to about a 6-minute process. So you're still not talking a whole long period of time, maybe 7 minutes at the very most, but you're still not talking a whole lot of time. But just so that you know, obviously with upload or downloading and installing a new firmware, there is a little bit of increased time there, of course. It will tell you that it's being applied, and then it will tell you that it's reconnecting once the router has applied the update and has rebooted, and now your device is connecting back to it. If there is no update found because you are on the latest firmware, then the screen you will get is this, which says already up to date. And you'll be set to go, and you'll be able to just click next and move on. This is where you can actually add additional APs, because remember, the wireless routers do have our wireless controller built into them for active roaming and for ease of configuration and central management. So if you are going to be adding access points into this network onto this router, it prompts you, this is the time to plug them in and let the access points come up and allow them to be attached. Of course, if you aren't adding any APs, you can just click next and skip this step. What's going to happen if you are adding access points is there is now a new auto add feature for the access points, and we'll talk about more about this in a moment. But it will actually allow the access points to boot up, find the controller, and automatically connect themselves to the controller that's inside that router. So it's really a very seamless automatic process. The next screen is setting up your 2.4 gigahertz network, and this is where you can type in whatever SSID and password that you want. It does default to WPA2 automatically, so that you already have some security set in. Once you type in whatever you want your SSID and password to be, you will notice off on the right-hand side of each one of those lines there is a green check mark. And that only shows up once you have fulfilled the qualification of having enough characters that are in each one of those fields for both SSID and passphrase. Once those two green check marks show up, the next button will turn again from gray to green, and you'll be able to move forward. Then the next screen is the ability to change the 5 gigahertz if you want. Now you notice it will auto-populate these fields for you with the same username and password that you just put into the first field for the 2.4, but it will add 5G to it. Now, of course, you can modify that in any way that you want to. You can get rid of the 5G and have the 2, 4, and 5 named the same. You can completely erase the entire 5 gig SSID and name it something completely different, both SSID and password if you want to. It's completely customizable for whatever you want to do for that particular network. But it does auto-populate for you if you want to make it fast and easy. Once it's set the way that you want it to be, you click next. It will then apply the changes to the network. both the router and all of the access points if they've already been attached. And then at the end, it will say, congratulations, you're all done. That's literally it. It's seriously about a 2-minute process at most. The cool thing about this is you do have the ability to send this information and document it. So if you click the network info button right there, it will give you information about what you just set up to that or on that network. And then based upon whatever type of communication apps are in your phone, whether it's email, text, chat of some sort, whether it's WhatsApp or whatever it is that you happen to be using, whatever is available in your phone to communicate, you can now share that information via that method. So if you need to email it back to the home office so that you have a document of it or a record of it and somebody can put that in the file for this customer, then you can absolutely do that. Just email it off to whoever you need to, and you're done. The new setup button, of course, takes you back to the beginning screen if you needed to set up another router at the same time without closing the app. But once everything's done, you're good to go, and that's it. That's the Easy Setup app. So literally, it's as simple as that, and we're really excited about it. It's been well received. If you haven't had a chance to use it yet, I would highly recommend giving it a shot because it does make things very simple. Now, to be fair, you still can and always will be able to log into the user interface at 192.168.0.1 and configure the router that way. To be honest, what the Easy Setup app does is everything that is available on the main page that's brought up by default as soon as you log onto that interface. Everything is still there on one screen that you need to set that up. But if you don't want to bring out your laptop, or if you don't have a laptop with you and you just want to use the phone to set it up, you certainly can do that. So either option is available to you. Now, of course, if you're going to do more advanced configuration inside the router, then you're going to log into the interface and do all of those types of things there as well. So, but that's mainly what it's there for, is to try and set up the initial setup of the router. All right. So moving on from routers, there's two new features in our switches that can certainly help be beneficial to you from a PoE standpoint. The first one is PoE Scheduling. And I do have a screenshot of it here, but I'm actually going to see if I can change over and go live into the switch here and show you how this works. So if you go to the Quick Setup and the PoE section, there are two new sections in there. There used to just be configuration. Now you have scheduling and auto check. The first one we're going to talk about is scheduling. And this allows you to schedule per port PoE to be turned either on or off at a particular time from that port. So let's say, for example, that somebody was very concerned about their wireless being broadcast during the night when they were sleeping and they wanted to turn it off. And let's say you have your access point, let's just say that there's one for ease of demonstration here. Let's say that you have your access point that is on port number 5. So I'm going to go to port number 5 and I'm going to enable this scheduling. Now the way that this works is a grid where hour 0 is 24 and then it's a military clock all the way down here. So let's say I wanted to turn things off at 10 o'clock at night. So I'm just going to select everything to make it really, really simple. And then at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to turn the PoE of that particular port off. And I want to turn it back on at 6 a.m. And you can see this is just a global on and off. Of course, I can set things for just individual days if I want to. But let's say every single day, I want to turn things off and I want them to turn back on at 6 a.m. I can certainly do that. And here's my grid that shows me that I've done that. I go down to the bottom and I click Save. And now you can see that there's a green check mark here on port number 5 letting me know that I have set a schedule for that particular port. And if I want to go back and modify it, of course, all I have to do is go back to port number 5 and it will show me that, and I can modify it however I need to. So now you have the ability to turn things on or off on a PoE basis, whether it's access points, cameras, touchscreens, whatever the case is that you may need to schedule. And that's really neat, and it's actually more beneficial in Europe because, believe it or not, they actually have laws over in Europe that say that you can't have your Wi-Fi on during the evening or at night. So it's pretty beneficial for them. Here in America, of course, we don't generally have that rule or law or that culture, and so it might not be as relevant. However, one that is, I think, is this auto check, and this is what we call self-healing. And this is a big, big deal because now it makes it so that the switch can try to heal a lost device on the network without any intervention from you. Oh, excuse me, let me turn my uh, thing off here. All right, so without any intervention from you, you can now have it try to heal things. So let's say I have a camera on my network somewhere. I've done a surveillance system, and it's on port number 3, for example. I can put in the IP address of that camera. So let's say, for example, it's 192.168.0.220, for example. It's outside my DHCP range. It's set on a static IP, so it's always the same IP address. What the switch will do is it will ping that particular IP address. And if it loses that ping, you can set a failure action and it will try to recover that. So let's go through this here. And if you don't know, our owner's manual is built into the user interface of all of our products. So you can go right over here and click the question mark button, and it will tell you what every one of these options are. So what this one basically, what the startup time is as you can see here, the amount of time the switch will wait before starting to ping the PD, which is the powered device. So you can say, okay, I want to wait 60 seconds after I set this up before the switch starts to actually ping anything. The interval time of what I want it to do is I want it to ping that device every 30 seconds. And again, if you go over and open up the owner's manual, you can see what the range will be. The default is 30 seconds, but you can go from 10 to 120. So you can modify it however you want to. So in this case, every 30 seconds, I'm going to ping that device. If I lose that ping, I'm going to retry 3 times every 30 seconds before I do something. And the do something part is right over here in the failure action. And this is restart the PoE, which means it will power cycle that device and it will do it automatically. The reboot time is then the reboot time of the device, because obviously we don't want the switch to start trying to ping it again to see if it can connect before the device has had a chance to reboot, or else you could potentially get into an endless reboot cycle because it's going to just keep trying to restart the PoE there on that port and never give the device an ability to boot up fully and reestablish its IP connection. So again, this is whether it's a touchscreen, whether it's a camera, whether it's an access point, whatever it is that's based on PoE that you've got plugged into the switch, it can be set up now to heal itself. And if it loses its connection to that device, power cycle that device in an attempt to try and get it to actually come back up and be back on the network the way that it should be. Again, we go down to the bottom here and we hit save, and then it becomes permanent. And actually, I did miss a step. You want to enable the ping check so that it's there. And you hit save, and now it's up and running. Now, as you well know in switches, the one thing that you want to do is when things are set up, there is a second place to save. And that second place makes all of these settings permanent for you, because right now, these things are saved, but if the switch gets power cycled or rebooted, it's not going to come back up the way that I have just set it up. So when things are running the way that you want, you definitely want to go to Administration, Configuration, and Save the Startup Config, and click that button. And as soon as you do, now it will become permanent, and every time the switch reboots, those settings will be still intact, and you'll be able to have the switch boot up the way that you want it to be and need it to be set up, rather than coming up to its default. Okay, I'm sure some questions have been gathered there. We'll jump onto those here in just a moment, but I wanted to go over those. Lastly, I wanted to cover a couple of upcoming products and features that we have coming, namely our XAP 1610. We are very much hoping this to launch right around the end of this month. Things are looking good for that at this particular point. Of course, don't ever quote me on that because something could change, but things are looking fairly good at this point. It is the exact same form as the 1510, so it is not any bigger. Same exact housing as the 1510. But what it does have in it is 4x4 antennas instead of 3x3 with Wave 2 multi-user MIMO. And I don't have time to get into a discussion about what that really is here in particular, but it does have the ability, in essence, to have multiple conversations with multiple devices at the same time while maintaining the same speed to each one of those devices. So some cool little technology there. Of course, it will be a 1-watt transmitter, as all of our access points are. It will, of course, be compatible with the controller, so you can have active roam assist with that. And again, it'll be around $600 retail price. And like I said, we're hoping for right around the end of this month for that launch. Couple new features that are coming with a firmware update in the controller within the next couple of months. And this will be across the board for all controllers that are coming. The first one is individual channel control. Now, as you have probably noticed, in those of you that have used the controller in the past, all of the access points are always on the same channel. And the main reason for that is because we have found by far the most devices will roam easier, faster, and smoother when they are all on the same channel. However, we do recognize that sometimes there is different interference in the living room than there is in the kitchen, for example, and so you sometimes want the ability to adjust that, and so that is going to be a feature that is going to allow that adjustment on a per AP basis. Another one that's coming is central administrative password, so that when you put a password in to log into the controller, that same password gets pushed out to all access points. So everything is on the same thing, so a little bit of a heightened level of security there. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the auto assign AP feature is also coming. It is already built into the wireless routers. It is coming to the standalone controller. So when the AP boots up, it will find the controller, and instead of you having to log into the controller and click the button so that it moves from the available screen to the assigned screen, it's just it's one button click, but we're trying to get rid of that for you. So it'll automatically now boot up, and when the access point finds the controller, it will automatically assign itself, and the configuration file will be sent so that it will automatically be broadcasting the same SSID and password as what your network is set up to do. Lastly, there will be a transmit power adjustment per AP. This one can get a little tricky because you do need to be a little bit careful that if you've got let's say again, the living room kitchen example, if you've got an access point in both the living room and the kitchen, and you turn the one down in the kitchen because you're trying to force or help a device move to the one in the living room, which a lot of other companies do because they don't have active roaming, and that's the big difference there. We do, and so it's not as big of a deal. But remember that if you turn one access point power down, you've also turned that power down for every device that's still connected to it. So there's obviously a little bit of a balance there of making sure that if you do need to adjust it down, that you're doing it in an appropriate manner that doesn't create unintended consequences and less performance overall on the network. So those features are coming. I don't have a date on that firmware update yet, but it is coming to the standalone controller and the controller that's in the wireless routers as well. So that is upcoming. So with that, I know I've kind of talked a little bit quickly. We can now open it up to questions. And Chris or Megan or whoever's there, let's go for questions.
Yeah, so first question, actually, the first two questions are kind of the same. Do Luxul routers allow the ability to combine both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz network to one name, sharing the same SSID across both?
Yes, absolutely, you can do that. You can have it, and it's up to your personal preference or your customers, however you talk through it, as to whether you want to do that or not. But yes, the router does allow that ability to have them either the same or separate, completely up to your choice.
Perfect. And next one would be if you could explain a little more on the reboot time feature for the auto heal. Is it going to power cycle the port every 15 seconds or wait the 60-second power cycle in the first setting that was performed.
Okay, so in this particular example, this startup time is how long the switch will wait until it starts to ping the initial time. Once it is pinging, if it loses its ping, it will then go to this interval, or excuse me, the interval time here. It'll ping it every 30 seconds, and then if it loses its ping, it will try that 3 times before it reboots the port, or reboots the power out of that port. So this is just the initial, hey, I've set up this IP address. How long do you want me to wait until I start to ping it? Once it starts that ping, then it goes to this interval time as to how often it will continue to ping it. Does that answer the question, I think?
Yep. And then next question. How do you remotely reboot the switches, the AMS 4424, 2616Ps? Seems like this dealer seems like he needs to reboot it every so often. And is there a way to do that without having to physically go out to the job site and do that?
About rebooting
Could we
the
set it
switch.
up with the PDU?
Yeah,
Rebooting the
that's
switch. Yeah, basically doing a
full power cycle, it sounds like. Yeah, there is a way to do that. The easiest way, like was mentioned, is to use a PDU or an IP controllable PDU, and then have that on a system, a remote monitoring or management system like Domot's, and then you can log in remotely from wherever you happen to be and power cycle that device from your phone, your tablet, your computer, wherever you happen to be. You do not have to drive out to the job site. Shouldn't have to be rebooting a switch that often. That's a little bit concerning as to why that may be happening. But if this goes for a switch or any device on the network, certainly you can put any device that is goes into a electrical outlet on a PDU and power cycle that, as long as that PDU is IP controllable and you're using something like Domus to do it. But yes, I actually have that set up here at the office. I've got it at my home, and there are devices that I will log in and reboot whenever is necessary, and I don't have to leave where I am to go do that. I do not have to physically go unplug it. Works really, really well, and with Domos, it's extremely reliable.
great. And the next one is this dealer only having set up a couple of XWR 1200s. Is it a difficult process for the units to find the XAPs on the network to allow wireless controller to add into it later, expand? If you want to go into that a little more.
Yeah, no, it isn't. The way that it works is when the access points boot up, they automatically look for the controller on the network as part of the boot up process. And if they find it, a couple of things happen. Remember, the access points by default out of the box are on a static IP, generally 192.168.0.10. If they find the controller on the network, or if there is a controller on the network and they will find it, they will then switch to a DHCP IP address. Because again, now you're not ever going to need to log into the access point itself. Everything is managed through the controller. So the way that it works is the first thing that happens, of course, is that DHCP change takes place. And now with the auto add feature, they will automatically add themselves. The controller will push the config file out to the access point so that it can start to broadcast the SSID and password that you have set up in that router already. There are some circumstances where, for whatever reason, because the access point does have to be in a factory default state. And the reason I mention that is if the access point is ever logged into, it will think that it is going to be set up as a standalone device and not be attached to a controller. And if that's the case, then it stops looking for the controller. And so there are some circumstances where, for whatever reason, it doesn't think it's in a factory default state or it's been logged into before, and it won't automatically find the controller. And if that's the case, the very simple fix is on the back side of each access point, there's a little factory reset button. You can press and hold that for 15 seconds, and that will factory default the unit and reboot it. And then when it comes up, it should be able to find the controller without any problem at all.
One other question. Once you've added a access point to the wireless controller, is there an option to be able to set it to those access points to a static IP?
Router, you can set a static route, or not, excuse me, not a static route, a static lease, or a DHCP reservation, as it is sometimes called. And once you go into the router and set that, in fact, I don't have a router here to connect to, or else I'd log in and show you, but once you go into the static lease page, you'll see the device in there. You can just, hey, I want to put this on a static lease, which means it will give it the same IP address every time. The one thing that a lot of people don't realize is in our routers, you can then set, once the static lease is set, you can then modify what the IP address of that static lease is. You can also modify it to be either inside or outside of the DHCP range. So by default, our range is 100 to 200. And let's say that obviously the access point is going to be inside that range because it's going to be given a DHCP address. If you want to move it outside of that range, let's say you want your 3 access points or your 2 access points to be on .50 and .51, for example, because that's where you always put them, you can do that. You can move them outside of the DHCP range by using the static lease feature. So again, you don't set a static IP on the access point, you'd set a static lease inside the router, and then you can modify that IP address to be whatever it is you want it to be on the network.
Let's see here. Will a big improvement be noticed changing to wireless controller for AP? I don't know if we want to, can you expand on that a bit, Mike? I don't know if you got that at all, Jared. The question is, will a big improvement be noticed changing to wireless controller for, yeah.
Is he referring to what does the wireless controller do?
If you're using a single access point, well, I'm not positive, but if you're just tying a single access point in, you don't need the wireless controller. If you're doing 2 or more access points, then you would want to have the wireless controller.
Generally, yes. Yeah, if you're just using one, the main thing that the controller allows or offers is roaming from access point to access point. So if you only have one, there's no roaming involved because the one is probably covering the entire space that you need, and all the devices are always going to just be attached to that single one. But if you have more than one, then I would highly recommend using the controller. Now that one, or the 2 of them could be 2 standalone access points if you're using the standalone controller, or it could be one being a wireless router and then an additional access point, or 2 additional access points. Because remember, the Wi-Fi that's broadcast from the wireless routers is able to be used as one of the access points in the controller of that wireless router.
Perfect. And the next question is, are VLANs required for setting up an access point to the XWR 1200?
VLANs are not required, no. They're required if you want to do a guest network or some other sort of separation, point of sale equipment if it's a small business or a restaurant type thing. But no, VLANs are not required at all for setting up an access point to the router or to the wireless controller. Only if you want to do something extra.
And then awesome. And then the next question, if a 3150 or one of the wireless routers is already set up and they want to add an access point, are they going to have to end up reconnecting or reconfiguring the network?
No. You will leave the router as it is currently running. You'll just be adding that other access point to it. And again, with the auto add feature, it should be literally as simple as plugging in the access point and letting it configure itself. Let me jump into a router. Well, actually, I don't have a wireless router here. It's not going to work. I was going to show you the interface, but I don't have one handily available, unfortunately. But no, to answer your question, you do not have to reconfigure the entire network. Even if the access point doesn't auto add, all that you would do is plug in the access point, let it boot up, and then in the controller section of the user interface, there's two screens, one on the left and one on the right, or two windows, I should say, one on the left and the right. And the one on the left is unassigned access points, and the one on the right is assigned. You just highlight the one that you want to assign, click the little arrow, and it will then assign it to the controller and automatically send out the SSID, password, all of the wireless information to that new access point and configure it on the network as the rest of the network is. So all you're doing is adding this piece and adding that configuration to the network. You do not have to redo your entire network.
Perfect. And the next question that came in is there any roadmap of adding wireless controller features into the rack mount routers, the 4500, the 5000, or Epic 5, whichever way you want to call it?
At this time, no, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the big reasons why the wireless routers can only add 2 access points is because you have to keep in mind that it's not just about how many access points you can add onto the controller, it's how many devices can be on each one of those access points. And for example, on a 1510, I can have over 250 clients at one time on each access point. You add that of two 1510s plus the 3150, let's say, for example, and I've got, 350, 400 devices or so that I can have on the network at all times. The processor inside the controller has to be able to process all of that. And one of the things that we don't want to do is overload the processing capability that would then slow down the router function. And so because of that, that's one of the main reasons why, look, we want it to be a router, we want it to be a really good router. We've added the controller function, but we don't want that to bog the whole system down. With the standalone units, what we have found by far is that most of the time they're going into larger size networks or larger size projects. And because of that, more than 2 access points are generally used anyway. With that being the case, usually people just go straight to the standalone controller because you're going to need more, because the standalone controller has more processing capability and can do 16 access points with 250 some odd client devices attached to all 16 of them at the same time without a problem. And we don't have to worry about slowing down the router function as well because we're using a different processor. Kind of like the same idea of separate components in audio. You're always going to get a better audio result if you're using a separate preamp, power amp, and preamp or a processor. Same thing is true here. And so we don't want to load things down. I know that was kind of a long answer, but the short answer is no, at this time we are not going to be putting the controller into the standalone or hardwired routers. And that's the reason why.
All right, and next question is more of a situation. If my customer has issues with connectivity and drops or buffer streaming, also the phone stops connecting and drops out in the Wi-Fi in certain locations, what's the best solution? Is there training to replace the existing router that might have been a shortcut hits, or how to speed that up? Do you guys have how-to videos, things like that?
First thing I would think of is maybe take a look at our wireless webinar. I think they call it Wireless Essentials. But in there, they talk about site surveys, and that's the first thing I would do if you haven't already, is grab your phone and use one of the apps that's available there for free that you can use to measure what the signal strength is in those areas that you're having difficulty. And then if it's good, then we can maybe go down one path. If it's not so great of a signal, then, which is usually the case, then coverage may be the bigger issue, either coverage or interference. And if that's the case, then certainly there are some things that we can do to do that. Obviously, if it's coverage that's the issue, then you have two options. One is add an access point or move an access point from one location to the next to see if that increases the coverage area and therefore the overall experience. Because yeah, if you've got good coverage, you shouldn't be experiencing dropouts and things like that. Generally, what we see is that coverage is king. And if you have good coverage everywhere, the speed usually follows. And it's a positive experience for your customer because now they can walk wherever it is they want to walk and do whatever it is they want to do wherever they happen to be in their home on their Wi-Fi, and they think that it just always works. And as you, all of you well know, it sometimes takes a pretty big effort to get to that point from a design and an implementation standpoint of the wireless. But man, when you do, it works really well and your customer's very, very happy. So I'd start with a site survey and then go from there.
And then can you speak a little more to the process required if an access point is not seen by the 3150 after it's all booted up?
Yes. So again, if it doesn't automatically get seen and show up in that window, the first thing I would do is press that button on the back of the access point and factory reset it. If that doesn't work for some reason, you can log into the access point, and there is a feature in there called Link Controller. And there is a video about this, a how-to video on our website about this. And what it allows you to do is type in the IP address of where the controller is. In this case, it would be the IP address of the router, which would be 0.1. And it basically says, here, this is where I want you, this is the controller I want to force you to attach to. So there are a couple of options there, but for the most part, if it doesn't show up and you tried the factory reset, it 99.9% of the time does show up after that. If it doesn't, like I said, you do have the link controller function inside the access point that will allow you to attach it.
Some great questions, guys.
Yeah,
if you
they
guys
are.
have any other questions, feel free to post them in the questions box. I know how it goes. As soon as we get off this webinar, whether it's right away, throughout the day, next week, question's going to pop up and you're going to go, oh crap, I wish I asked that. Don't worry, feel free to give us a call at Capital Sales. We'd be happy to help you out, answer those questions, talk about your project, or give the guys at Luxul a call. You know, we're all here to help you out. We'd love to hear what you're doing and make sure your questions are answered before you get out on the job site, and then everybody gets frustrated. So definitely would love to hear from you. Give Capital a call, give Luxul a call. We're all here. One other question, let's see here. We did answer this before, but we can definitely do it again. Can an SSID be set up to only broadcast on 2.4 or both 2.4 and 5G? Actually, we didn't ask that one yet.
Is that different from the first question? Say that question again. Maybe I misunderstood it.
Yeah. So can we set up an SSID, a second SSID, to only broadcast on 2.4 versus both 2.4 and 5G?
Oh, yes, you can. You can easily do that from inside the controller function of the wireless router if that's what you're using, or the AP itself if it's just a standalone AP. If you want separation from the two networks, then that's when VLANs become a factor, and that's when they come into the picture. But if you're just looking to broadcast just a separate SSID that is on the same subnet and the same network, yeah, that's a piece of cake to do. Again, if you want it separated out, so you have a 2.4 that, let's say, is on a guest network, for example, that is completely isolated from the main network and only has access to the internet but does not allow the ability to see anything else on the first or main network, then you would need to use VLANs and make sure that you have a router and switch and an access point that can handle trunking and tagging. So you need a managed switch if you have a switch in the mix, that type of thing. And obviously, we don't have time to get into the VLAN discussion again. We have an entire setup video about that as well that's on the website. But yeah, for just setting up a simple secondary broadcast for an SSID, yes. If you want it to be isolated, yes, you still can do it, but you will need to introduce VLANs at that point.
Perfect. And can you touch base a bit on the dealer accommodation form? Question on showroom products, personal use. How does Luxul accommodate that?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. You can send an email to sales@luxul.com and just ask for a personal use code. This is the only time that you will buy something directly from us rather than Capital. What we do is we feel that we can talk about this and it's great to have these webinars, but the number one thing that we can do to help you feel more confident in networking is to actually get it into your hands and let you play with it and set it up at your home or set it up at your business, so that then when you get out to that next job site, your confidence level is much higher, because instead of going, yeah, I think maybe I can make this work, instead you say, yeah, I can make this work because I've done it before, I've seen it before, I know how to do it, and it becomes very simple and automatic for you. So if you send that email to sales@luxul.com, we will allow a purchase of the equipment at 50% off of dealer cost for one time for your home or your business.
Perfect. And I love questions like this next one. It kind of goes to one access point versus two, splitting load. And now it kind of gets into the 1610 versus the 1510. The question is, would the number of devices connected to access points vary? Meaning 6 Alexas, 5 TVs, 6 phones, Ring doorbells, 6 cameras, 8 Wi-Fi plug-in devices. How does this affect? Obviously, we have one access point that can cover all this, but where does that all land? What would be the best solution?
Is the question, is that too many devices for an AP?
Well, some of it is too many. The short answer is yes, but I think it would also kind of land on speed, whereas this kind of lands on the 1510 versus 1610, communicating to multiple devices at once. Are we going to notice a difference in speed, that type of thing?
Okay, so to answer the first part of the question, no, that many devices on one access point is not a problem. Well, at least on our access points, or obviously I can't speak for everybody else's, but no, it's not a problem. It becomes a matter of coverage. If one access point covers everything that you need, then you're most likely not going to be able to overload that access point with the amount of wireless devices. Because generally in a home, you're somewhere between, I don't know, 20, 30, maybe 40 wireless devices in an average size home. If it's a bigger home, obviously that increases, but no, I don't think overloading it with devices is going to be an issue. Again, it's a matter of coverage, and the time when you want to add more access points would be to increase the coverage area or to get coverage somewhere where it currently is not. What Chris is referring to is the 1610 versus the 1510, and this is a discussion of single user MIMO versus multi-user. Single user essentially means that you have one conversation at a time between access point and device. So let's say I have 30 wireless devices on there. As crazy as it sounds, that access point is only talking to one individual device at a time. And people think, well, that can't be right because I've got all these devices and they're always doing the same thing. And, my son can be streaming this and my daughter can be streaming that and my wife can be doing this. And, we're all doing it at the same time. And yeah, sure, it does happen at the same time because it happens at an incredibly fast pace. Remember that networks are all based upon milliseconds, not seconds or minutes. And thousands, tens of thousands of data packets are sent back and forth every millisecond. So it happens incredibly fast, which in real time, for the way that we perceive time, means that we can all do things at the same time. But technically speaking, is one conversation at a time. What the 1610 does is it has a thing called multi-user MIMO, which now introduces the ability to have more than one conversation at a time. So if you run a speed test on this thing, you may not see that your device is much faster on the 1610 than it is on the 1510. However, the difference is that you can have 4, 5, or 6 devices all doing the same thing and all receiving the same speed at the same time, because now you have the ability to have multiple conversations at the same time. And that's really where the big efficiency and overall performance difference comes with the 1610, is that you can have multiple devices that have full bandwidth capabilities at the same time rather than just one at a time. So kind of crazy to think about, but yeah, that's kind of the basic definition of single versus multi-user MIMO.
Perfect. And this next one is one that we always get is, can you give us the best rebuttal or sales pitches to people that bring up, well, why don't we do like a mesh network, Google Wi-Fi, Arrow, so on and so forth? Why can't I do that, or the difference between that and actually going with access points?
Okay, great question. How long we got? When I teach live classes, this is a topic that we talk about for, it could go on for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Obviously, we won't do that today. But the short answer is this. If you think about networks today, there's a couple of things here. First off, if you think about networks today, most of the time, if you ask your customer, how many devices do you have on the network? They are going to be nowhere close to what is actually on the network. They'll say, oh, 4 or 5, maybe 7 or 8. And you go start counting, and there's 35 devices on there because they forgot about all those Alexas that they have, and the smart TV that's also connected, and all these things that they just don't even think about. And then we, as our industry, have this ability to come in and say, well, we're going to put even more on that network, because we're going to talk about automation, we're going to talk about fancy remotes, and we're going to talk about lighting control or shading or multi-room audio and streaming this and streaming that. And we actually take that network and load onto it instead of maintaining it the way that it originally was. The problem with this, and I can bring up another little, let me pull up another little graphic here to show you this. Let's see here. Give me just a second, because I got a graphic that shows how this actually works. The problem with mesh networks is, number one, from a business standpoint, and I get that people are asking for it, kind of like they do with Sonos. But the problem with mesh networks, if I can find my little graphic here, where did it go? Here we go. I want to unhide these. And I'm actually going to unhide this one too. So let me run through this real quickly here. Hold on. One more. Realize that, well, there's a couple things here. Mesh networks are, first of all, not a new technology. And if you listen to the marketing of them, they will say, hey, this is the greatest thing that's ever hit Wi-Fi ever. And if you put this in your house, it'll magically fix your Wi-Fi and everything's just going to be great. And you'll never have to think about your Wi-Fi again. The reality is a little bit different, of course. First of all, mesh networking is not new. It's been around for about 20 years. And the thing that's interesting is, if you call a company that has been doing this for a long, long time and ask them and say, hey, I want to put your mesh product in, they will tell you, don't do it. Instead, put in our hardwired product, okay? The connotation also is that mesh is roaming, and that, because you've got these nodes all over the place, that it just seamlessly roams from place to place, and it's always just connected and blah blah blah. The reality is that it doesn't have anything to do with roaming. In fact, they use a thing called fast roaming, which is very, very different from what we do with active roaming. Okay, what really a mesh does is create coverage, which is exactly the same thing that we're teaching and what we're talking about, where coverage becomes king. It's kind of like Ford versus the Ferrari here. I don't know which one you guys would prefer, but if I had a choice of which one I drove to work and money was no object, Obviously, I would choose the Ferrari. Nothing against Ford, it's a fine car, but hey, I'd rather drive the Ferrari. So that's kind of a background in mesh. So what really mesh does, and this is how they work, regardless of brand, you have one of them that is directly connected to Ethernet, whether it's going right into the modem, whether it's a modem router, whatever the case is, it's directly connected. And then you take the others and put them around the home and create this big coverage area. They are not directly connected, and so what happens is now they are all connected wirelessly, which really is all a mesh is a wireless repeater to repeater to repeater type topology. And what happens as a result is, let's say I'm in this room over here, and I am on a mobile device there. Now, a bit of a funnel effect is created because I have to hop from this place to this one, then to this one, then to this one, which is finally the one that's connected via Ethernet. Now, in a traditional access point network, of course, you shouldn't have to do that because you'll have both of your access points directly connected to the Ethernet superhighway. And as I'm sure we can all agree, Ethernet is always a better and faster and more reliable connection than wireless is. So again, if I'm in the same scenario or I'm in this room, now I only have one hop. And that hop is from mobile device to the access point, and then everything else is on the Ethernet superhighway. So what does this mean for mesh networks? Let me see if I can pull up the disadvantages here. You can kind of see this. The disadvantages are that they are connected wirelessly, which now means they are subject to all of the unpredictable things that come along with wireless. Some of them, of course, have a dedicated backhaul radio in them, and that is true. However, the downside is those backhaul radios are all on 5 gig to enable higher, faster speeds and higher bandwidths. But the downside to 5 gig, of course, is that it does not go nearly as far as 2.4. And so if you've ever set some of these up, you'll see in the setup process that they'll say, oh, these two are too far away from each other. You need to move them closer. And you move it closer and closer and closer, and finally it says, okay, great, now you're good to go. But now you've created an even larger gap of coverage to whatever the next one is in the next hop in the system. So there are some disadvantages. And again, if all of that was out the window, think of it from a business standpoint. Mesh networks in general are a DIY type product. Think about the companies that are building these: Google, Amazon, Netgear, some of these companies that are mass market companies, and they are building it for the mass market. That's who they're advertising for. But then they come and they say, oh, well, CEDIA guys, sure, we'll take your money too. We'll allow you to sell it, but you don't make a whole lot of money on it, and you're competing with price, and we're competing with everything else that's going on in the marketplace. So from a business standpoint, that might be something worth considering, is whether that's in your best business interest to do that or not. I know it's a big deal. I know it's getting heavily advertised, which is creating this pull concept from customers asking about it. But the reality is there have been many, many third-party tests that have confirmed that when you start to load these things up with a lot of devices and larger networks, they just start to really not perform very well at all. So, long answer again, I apologize, but that's the basic spiel of it.
Thanks, Jared. Do you guys have any other questions? I haven't seen any rolling in for a bit, but I think it's probably because we were all focusing on how you were going to explain mesh networks. If you guys don't have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us if questions do arise, or Jared, or the guys at Luxul. We all want to help you out. We all love talking about networking because it's everything that we work with now connects to a network. So it's something that we all need to know about whether we want to or not. So if you guys have any questions, reach out to us. If there isn't any more questions that are going to come in, Jared, I want to thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to be a part of it. I appreciate the invitation.
Definitely. Well, if there's no other questions, Jared, thanks. I look forward to having you on again, again soon. And guys, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to learn about some of the new Luxul stuff, to learn about what Capital has to offer. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next webinar.